All right, so for the last few times that we've been here, we've been talking about the book of Hebrews. And so this is going to be the third part of that. We're still going to be in chapter 1. So if you've got your Bibles, turn into Hebrews chapter 1. And this time we're going to get through verse 4. It's awesome, isn't it? All right. Hebrews chapter 1, starting in verse 1. It says, "Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs." Is that ringy to you? Can y'all hear like a high pitch? Check, 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 check. Is that better? Does that sound better? Okay. I'm deaf, and that ringing is still in my ears. I'm like, that's crazy. Okay, so do you remember when we started back in the intro of this study, we discussed a little bit of the history that gives some context to what the book of Hebrews is about. And tonight we're going to do a little bit of review of that as we go into this, because I feel like it's very important to keep covering that. History shows that the book of Hebrews was written somewhere around 30 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. I think that is important because it means that there has been some considerable time that has passed since the life-changing event of the cross took place. Listen, it wasn't the hottest item on the news anymore. There wasn't social media for people to keep posting stuff left and right. There wasn't Facebook for somebody to post a selfie of the crucifixion as it happened. Things had just passed. 30 years had passed. Things had got a little bit different for those that were living in the outside of the Jewish system. And it wasn't easy for those who were professing to be a follower of Jesus, especially the Hebrew Jews that had converted to what they called the Way. Unlike the Gentiles who did not have a true knowledge of God and worshipped all kinds of things, the Jews had an established religion with its rituals and all the ceremonies and all the washings and all the different things they had to do, and an established place and order to their worship. Now, these same individuals who had grew up in that same system were now being called upon to forsake everything they had learned up to that point, and not the things that they had been respected, the things that had been taught through their family. And that was a big demand. That was something that was not easy for them to do at the time. Not only that, but it wasn't like they were given a new manual to exactly what they were supposed to do. It wasn't like that they decided to follow Jesus Christ. Now they were part of the Way. This is 30 years after the crucifixion. It wasn't like they handed them the Bible and said, okay, now if you just read your word and you'll pray 6 times a day, then everything will be okay. You'll find the leading. No. It wasn't that way. They were not meeting in an established place anymore. They didn't have a Mountain Grove or any other church that they could just go visit and look and see what was going on, have someone lead them. They were going from home to home and different believers, and they were meeting at different times whenever they possibly could. You know that had to be a complete, utter change from the regimented worship that they were used to. History also shows that there was a tremendous amount of pressure for these followers that was coming from everyone around them. Adolf Safir, a Hungarian Jew who later converted to Christianity and became a missionary to the Jews, wrote about this persecution of the believers during the time period, and he said this: "Then arose another persecution of the believers, especially directed against the Apostle Paul. Festus died about the year 63, and under the high priest Ananias, who favored the Sadducees, the Christian Hebrews were persecuted as transgressors of the law. Some of them were both stoned to death, and though this extreme punishment could not be frequently inflicted by the Sanhedrin, they were able to subject their brethren to sufferings and reproaches which they felt keenly. It was a small thing that they had confiscated their goods, but they banished them from the holy places. Hitherto they had enjoyed the privileges of devout Israelites. They could take part in the beautiful and God-appointed services of the sanctuary, but now they were treated as unclean and as apostates. And unless they gave up the faith in Jesus and forsake the assembling of themselves together, they were not allowed to enter the temple, and they were banished from the altar, the sacrifice, the high priest, and the house of Jehovah. So you can only imagine, in the midst of all that pressure and all the things that were going on, the unpredictable nature of the worship now that they were trying to do, and all the symbols of the old way of life that were staring them in the face. You can imagine them just looking around and seeing the temple, seeing all the people do the things that they normally used to do. And now here you are standing, and you begin to wonder, where is my standing in life? What am I doing? And what is my identity? Or what should it be? What should I claim as to who I am? And listen, when I read this, and I read this idea about this identity thing, this finally clicked with me. Hebrews chapter 1 started to click with me like never before, because it makes perfect sense. Because this is what I believe the author of Hebrews was going to do at the beginning of this letter, and that was to proclaim the superiority of Jesus Christ. Now, why did he do that? Because you've got a bunch of Christians, new baby Christians, even though they've been in here past the 30 years, that are starting to lose the idea of who they really are or what they are in Christ. This thought of identity really stood out to me and began to paint a clearer picture of why this letter seems to just dive right into the meat of the message. If you notice, when you pick up the book of Hebrews, there's no introduction. There's no warming up. There's no idea of who it's being written to. It's just, let's get right to the point. Let's get started right at this thing. Again, the Christians that we're talking about here were mostly Jewish converts. And it took some real dedication to actually be a Jew. One writer expresses this of what the daily life of a Jew is like. It says Judaism is about how to live, not just what to believe. Jewish daily life and the practice is how Jews do things day in, day out, and week after week. They embody the ideals and the standards expressed in Judaism, sacred writings, and its ancient and modern traditions. I mean, there are so many things. You see Jesus always talking to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and he's telling them, they're whitewashed sepulchres. They're dead on the inside, but they're painting on the outside because they're trying to do everything by works. But being a Jew and all the demands that's placed on it is literally your identity. Think about this. Think about your own life. I want you to think about these two questions. How are you identified? And how do you identify others? Just think about that for a minute. Because I want you to grasp this. I want this idea to set in on here. So what's the first thing you think about when you go to identify yourself, or you try to identify someone else? Anybody, any ideas? The name. That's right. The first thing that we identify things is by the name, by a name. If we were standing in a crowd and someone asked us about who a person is, if we were standing on here, somebody walked by and said, "Hey, who is that?" Most likely, your first response, if you know that person, is to identify them by name. You're going to walk around, "Hey, there's Dave. Hey, there's Wayne. Hey, there's Rhonda. Hey, there's Rick." If someone were to ask you, that's probably going to be the first time. But it's not always the first thing that you do. The next thing, and sometimes the first thing that we do, is we identify a person by what they do or by their actions. Think about it. You see Cliff walking out somewhere, somebody asks you who that is. "Hey, that's the pastor." "Hey, there's the tire guy." "Hey, here's my lawn guy. She's a teacher." And so on and on and on. We identify with what we do. It becomes a part of who we are. People at work identify me as that crazy CrossFit guy. I do CrossFit. They know I do CrossFit, so they're like, "Hey, there's that crazy CrossFit guy. He flips the tires and things." So that's what they identify me with. But here's another side of that coin. Think about that. Think about this. How many of you have heard people say, "Hey, there's that drunk. Hey, there's that drug addict. He's an abuser. She's a liar." We identify people by their actions. It hadn't changed in thousands and thousands of years. The Jews were the same ways. I don't think we realize how much our individual identity is caught up in the things that we do. I don't think we even think about it. Our works Our actions become who we are. What we say about ourselves, when people ask me, I tell people I'm a web designer. I tell people I'm a husband. I'm a daddy. It's all these things I identify with what I do. It's who I am. And again, the Jewish people were no different. Because of so much of what they did, their habits, their routines, their daily lives, was based upon their religious duties or activities. It was literally their identity. Guys, when these folks gave up being a Jew to follow after Jesus Christ, they gave up completely who they were. All the things that they had done before, all the actions, all the things that they were no longer that person. They didn't have to follow the eating rules, the washing rules. They didn't have to follow the rules to go to the temple all the time. They were completely different. And for most of them, like I said, they weren't handed a manual that said, this is how you do it. So now here you got to think, all these Christians are standing around trying to figure out, who am I? What am I doing? And here we are, thousands of years later, still asking the same question. Who am I? What am I doing? This idea was literally their identities, and they were Jews. They identified as Jews, and they were completely proud of who they were. But after they accepted Jesus, their identity was gone. They were no longer allowed to continue the things that had one time dominated their lives. Wayne, if you woke up tomorrow morning and you couldn't go to the tire store, what would you do? It's right. I mean, we do things over and over and over in our lives. They become habits in our lives. They become actions in our life. And all of a sudden, if somebody were to completely take that away from us, a lot of us in here would wake up and we'd pace the floor because we wouldn't know what to do. And I understand this. This is why it hit me so hard when I started reading this and started to grab a hold of this. Because, listen, when you look up Hebrews chapter 1 and you start doing studies, all people want to talk about are angels. Because it dominates the first chapter of the book of Hebrews. But literally, the book of Hebrews and the chapter of 1 about Hebrews has nothing to do with it. They're mentioned, but it has nothing to do with angels. I've been there. It's about identity. Hannah and I have been there. There was a time that Hannah and I walked away from a church that I had worked at for almost 15 years. I didn't give 2 weeks notice. I didn't have a big blow-up argument. I woke up on a Sunday morning, wrote an email, and never went back. And it was literally one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life. We had poured our hearts into so many things into that church, including the people that were there. And for several months, the Lord had dealt with us about leaving. And I didn't want to, because I had been there for almost 15 years. That was what we did. It was a part. We'd helped grow things in different cities. We had been part of church plants. It was something that we did. It was something that my life was tied to. I was actually, and if you know me well enough, you understand that sleep is very important to me. I don't have a problem sleeping, but if you interrupt my sleep, it's not good. It's just not one of those things that you should do. I'm like that bear that if you would wake it up out of hibernation, it's not good. But I was actually losing sleep because of the turmoil that was going on inside of my spirit. And finally, I woke up, like I said, on a Sunday morning, and I mean, Hannah will tell you that I don't lay at night and talk. I'm not one of those people that if you want to have a conversation with me, laying in the bed at night is not a time to have a conversation with me, because I'm going to fall asleep. I don't care how important it is. We could be talking about my children's life, but at some point around 9:30, 9:45, gone. Turn into the pumpkin. Don't mean to, body just shuts down. That's just the way that works. But listen, I woke up in the middle of the night on a Sunday, and I had been avoiding it. Like I said, it was probably 5 or 6 months I had been avoiding it. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off. I'm like, no, this has to be an attack from the enemy. Nobody would ever tell you to leave a church in the middle of doing whatever we were doing, especially as integrally as we were tied into it. But I felt this sense of urgency. As a matter of fact, I told Hannah, the Lord was not telling us to leave. The Lord was telling us to run, and run as far away as we possibly could. And we did. And it was terrible, and it was hard, and things were said about us. People ignored us out in public that we had been a part of their lives for many years. Things were completely different that Sunday morning. I didn't know what to do. When you go to church every Sunday, Wednesday, and Thursday night for 15 years, and you're an integral part of doing something, when you wake up on a Sunday and don't go to church, listen, don't go on vacation with me. I'm horrible. Sunday, we need to be in church somewhere. We're going to find something. I don't care what it is, we're going to find something. That's just what we do. We finally, after 2 or 3 weeks, we went to a church because one of my friends went there. And when Hannah and I went and talked to the pastor. And I told the pastor, I said, look, I'm not one of those people that sit around. I don't sit on a pew. That's not what I do. I've worked in a church for 15 years. We do something. And the guy literally told us, you should sit in the pew. That was a good sign that we weren't going to be there very long. And we were not. And it wasn't much longer that Cliff called. But I didn't know. Listen, I walked away from something that was dear to me. The Lord put the call on my life to teach and preach in that church. The pastor recognized it and gave me the opportunity to preach my first message there. And then continually used me. When I walked out of that building, I never knew if I would ever preach or teach ever again. I didn't have a clue. I was scared. Literally, I had no idea. Didn't know that I wanted to, but I didn't know whether I would or not. I needed tons of encouragement. I needed to be reminded almost daily that I was following the Lord. I needed somebody to tell me that it was okay, that I didn't make a huge mistake. And even though the picture that we had when we left was completely zero, we felt like Abraham when he left. God told Abraham to go, and Abraham went. Abraham didn't have a clue where he was going. And that's exactly how we felt. We didn't know what we were doing. And I questioned so many things that I'm like, did I make the right decision? Did I make the right choice? And I can imagine sitting here reading this, that this is what the people of Hebrews were feeling. These Christians that had gave up their entire life to follow Jesus. 30 years now has passed. He has passed away. He was on that cross and was crucified. And people were talking about it. Listen, Paul and these guys felt like the Lord was coming back that day. And they were preaching the message like the Lord was coming back tomorrow. And so here's these Christians that were on the outside following and yeah, let's go. And 30 years has passed and now they're looking around and the church is persecuting them. Their family is persecuting them. And that they had to be thinking, what in the world am I doing? What are we doing? All we have to do is just give up and go back to our normal way of life. And I believe that is exactly what is happening here at the book of Hebrews. The author is addressing those that may be feeling like they are missing something. They have been longing for that familiar system, the old covenant they had been practiced for so long. And I believe seriously that that's why this letter wastes absolutely no time in getting started. Right out of the gate, the book of Hebrews declares from almost the first sentence, declares the magnificence of Jesus Christ. Again, Hebrews chapter 1 says, long ago at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoke to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he inherited is more excellent than theirs. It says that the Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact expression of his nature. What does that mean? It's not just a simple way of saying, you know what, he's just a chip off the old block. If I were to bring, most of you know my children, if I were to bring my boys in here and stand them right beside of me, there is no way that I could ever deny that those two boys are mine. You could look at us and go, yep, belongs to him, without a doubt. Especially Avery. Looks just exactly like I did when I was a child. But the thing of it is they're not exact copies of who I am. They're still their own individual selves. But the word that is used here for radiance gives us a picture of a mirror reflecting an exact representation of the image standing in front of it. A reflected brightness, speaking that of Christ, that He is the perfectly reflects the majesty of God. Perfect. He was the exact expression, the Bible goes on to say. Now here's what's awesome. The Bible uses the word for exact expression, or whatever version of the Bible you're reading, it's the same word. It uses this awesome Greek word. How many of you knew that you knew Greek? Raise your hand. All of you knew Greek and didn't even know it. The word that is used for exact expression here is the word character. It's the exact word that we have in the English language. Character. And it means it's the exact expression or image of any person or thing, marked likeness and precise reproduction in every respect. It's a complete, exact model. The idea that they use here comes from an ancient art of engraving, or a stamping of soft or hot metal with a pattern. And when the metal becomes hot enough to take it, they take something and stamp it right in it to make the mark. They use this in coin making years and years and years and years ago. This is how they made their coins. Nobility would employ someone, an engraver, who carved a royal portrait or suitable words or abbreviations or stamps on a die made of hard metal. The engraver then used the stamp to make coins so that the coin gave the exact impression of what was on that stamp. The exact impression. So when you watch the History Channel, you see people talk about those coins or find old coins, and it's nothing more than a piece of metal with a stamp put on it. Think about those letters with the royal seal where they'd put the wax on it and they would put the stamp on it. That was the mark to show that this was who it came from. So just think about the idea. If you took this piece of Play-Doh, so I have blue Play-Doh, and you wanted to make this object right here, okay? If I stand in front of that speaker, it's going to ring. If you tried to make this thing with a pencil, okay, I'm going to stand over here. Is that better? Yeah, it's better. If you tried to make this shape with a pencil, all of us could come up here and take a pencil, and we would try to do our best at making this shape. Some of them would be awesome. Some of them would not look so good. Some of them would look like a starfish. Some of them might look like this. Some of them might look like a round blob. But if we wanted to make an exact representation, then we had to make a mold, or we had to make a die. So if I take this, and this is Play-Doh, so you know it's not going to be exactly perfect. But I have almost made two exact copies of one another. But I had to have a stamp. I had to have a mold. I had to have something that would represent what I wanted to make. Again, if I tried to do this by hand, it would look like a blob up here with different shapes or whatever, and I could make whatever, but it would never look exactly like this. But if I wanted to make a reproduction, I have to make a mold of what I'm doing. And that is what the word character is talking about. It was an accurate impression left by a stamp on a coin. And from there, the word developed, and it became the idea of what an individual letter. Think about handwriting. If we all took a piece of paper and wrote the same sentence around here, some of it, we'd all pass around, it would all completely look different. It wasn't until they created the printing press or the typeset that things started to look exactly the same. But think about this idea of individual's letter that would be produced in a stamping force, and here, hence the word character or characters in our language. If you do something in type, you're using a character. And in the broad sense of term, people started to use this to talk about people or things. And this is what the writer is saying about Jesus. It is though it is though the exact imprint of the Father's very nature and glory have been precisely reproduced in a soft metal of a human nature. And now it is here for all the world to see. Think about a king. And you can think about the Old Testament and the New Testament this way. It says, think about a king that has been waiting for a long time to tell his subjects who he was, to give them an idea about what his character was really like. And supposing that the stamp or metal dies had not been made to make that exact impression, the king would only be able to send out pictures or likenesses or representations of what he was really like. But he would never be able to send a full, exact picture out. But then all of a sudden, technology moves forward and the stamp is made. Now, the time is available for an exact picture to be made. And this is exactly what the Old Testament and New Testament is like. God, for so long, had been sending advanced sketches, pictures, ideas, thoughts, representations of himself out to the people. But now that Jesus Christ has come, he is the exact portrait of that being of who God really is. He is the exact representation. And that is what the writer is trying to get the people to see. He is trying to exhort those Hebrews who have walked away to say, look, all those things that you had dealt with as Jews, all those symbols of who God was or what the coming Messiah would be, has now been fully represented in Jesus Christ. He is the exact expression of who God is. God is here. But then the author then shifts from this idea and goes on to enforce this even more. To even more push the idea that Jesus Christ is even more superior than anything, because he talks about their next largest tradition in the world, and that was angels. This is why he talks about the angels. Hebrews 1:3 says, after making purifications for sin, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited and is more excellent than theirs. So one of the things that I found out as I was studying, because I didn't know this, and maybe you did, but during that time, and during that time period of the Jews, angels were held at a really, really high esteem. They thought of angels as being right under God. The list was God, angels, and Moses. And that's the way they looked or appreciated or thought about angels. As a matter of fact, many Jewish scholars, I did not know this, place angels at every place where God talked to man. They even placed angels at the point where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, because they said that Moses would have never been able to touch the hand of God to receive these things, that angels had to be there to give them to him. The Bible doesn't talk about that at all, but that's what they believe. They place angels on this high pedestal. But the main thing here in verse 4 is that Christ is better than the angels. He is better than anything else that's going on. How much is he better, and how much is he better than the rest of the chapter? And that's what the chapter is about. Basically, in summary, verse 4 answers this with a comparison. How much greater is Christ than angels? He says he is as much better than the angels, as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. So what does that mean? He's inherited a much more excellent name. What name did Christ inherit that shows he is so much greater than the angels? When Christ died and made purifications of sin and triumphed over death and Satan, he was enthroned as king and seated at the right hand of God. Now, the picture that he's trying to paint here is that when a king was enthroned in the Old Testament, there was much acclamation going on. There was a big praise going on, because now this king was formally taking up the title and the inheritance which he had been given by birth. Hebrews 1:5 says, to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I have become your father, or again, I will be his father? and he will be my son. This is directly quoted from Psalms 2:7 and 2 Samuel 7:14. The point to the verse is to tell us that the name that is so superior to angels is Son. He was named Son. So verse 4 says that Christ has inherited a more excellent name than the angels. And in verse 5 says, for to what angel did God ever say, you are my son? So the superior name is Son. Think about a family. Think about things that are going on. Listen, you and I can be best friends forever. But you will never take the place of a child. You will never rank in authority in anyone's life as compared to a child. So when Christ is called the Son of God, he assumes at the right hand of the Father the place which he had inherited. But here's some amazing stuff you're going to find out, that we assumed it right there beside of him. And that's what the author is trying to get the Hebrews to see. Listen, yes, you walked away from all those symbols. You walked away from the shadow of what is to come, and you have walked into the substance. And Christ is at the right hand of the Father as the Son. In Romans 1:4, Paul says that Christ was declared the Son of God by power, or with power by the resurrection from the dead. He has always been the Son of God, just like he has always been the heir of all things, which said in verse 2, but when he had made purifications for our sin and triumphed over death and Satan, Christ was declared Son of God and heir of all things on a new basis in a new way. He was publicly placed in that spot. He had always been there, but now for everyone to see, he has now been put in that place of authority. And now he reigns as the God-man, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, not only by his eternal right, but now by the right of the victory over sin and death. He is the Son of God and manifests power by the resurrection. There are a lot of religions out there, and there are a lot of people that can say a lot of things. They can talk about the peace that lies with Buddha, the things where we go and we say our mantras and we bring all of our works together and we try to live a good life. But listen, Buddha was never raised from the dead. We can still find his grave. He will never be placed in a place of authority because he was never the Son. There is no other religion on the face of the earth where a person has been named the Son of God other than Christianity. Think about it. All of them have been named prophets or great people. They're these great teachers that have led us into the way. But Jesus Christ was named the Son of God. So what does that mean for us? If we are like these Hebrews, and you are at the point where you may not understand what your next step is, or you are looking back at your former life and thinking, maybe it wasn't so bad. Or you're thinking about just giving up where you are. The Scripture says, and I want you to know that you are not alone and that there is hope. Be encouraged. The one that saved us is greater than any circumstance that we will ever face. He is greater than any challenge, and he is for you and not against you. 1 John 4:4 says this, you are from God, little children, and you have conquered them because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. Galatians 4:4-7 says that when the time came to completion, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then you are an heir through God. Romans 8:14-17. All those that were led by the God's Spirit are God's sons. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received the Spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies together with our spirit that we are God's children. And if children, also heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, seeing that we suffer with him so that we may also be glorified with him. Guys, we are the church. We are children of God. If you're walking around with an identity crisis, quit looking at your works and quit looking at the things you've done in the past and look at who you are in Christ. He said that we are citizens of heaven, that we have a place right beside the Father. We are joint heirs with Christ. And that's the thing that sets us apart from all the world. You want to know where joy, where hope, where our peace lies from? It lies from the fact that our brother paid the ultimate price for us all. That we can now stand up and quit identifying with what the world calls us. They can point and look at our past and say whatever they want to. They can look at you and say, listen, you were nothing then and you're nothing now. They can call out all the faults. They can dig up all the past that you may have and call you by every action that you've done. But listen, the one who created us, the one through whom all the world was created, through all the things, looks over and says, you're a son. You're a child. You're no longer a slave to this world. But you have been redeemed and bought and adopted. And the authority of heaven backs you up in every step you take. That should make you shout. That should make you say amen. That should make you wake up every morning thankful that you're alive. There's not a thing in this world that can take you out. Nothing can separate us from that love anymore. Nothing. But here's the cool thing. There's a world out there that surrounds us, that is dying, that is hurting, that is in pain, that is being held down by the names of the actions that they're being called. And they're struggling and they're looking for their identity. And guys, we don't have to holler at the top of our lungs. We don't have to get mad and argue with anyone. I know at the end of the day where I'm going. I have no doubts, no fears. But the love of Christ is on the inside of us. It has been shed abroad by the Holy Spirit according to Romans 5. And it is looking for a way out. We are that vessel. We are the church, and we should be pouring it out everywhere we go. You want to diffuse anger? Love somebody. You want to diffuse an argument? Love somebody. You want to diffuse all the pain and hurt that somebody's in past? Love them where they are. I've had so many people in my life, and this is not a praise on myself, but I just think it's hilarious because I don't see myself this way. But I've had people tell me before, if all Christians were like you, I could hang around Christians. I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe I'm not doing a good job enough, but maybe I am. I don't know. But you'll find out real quickly talking to me, I'm not going to argue with you. I used to. I started a phone ministry at the church that I worked at before. We had a TV show on the WHKY with the blue screen. We didn't have a blue screen. We had our own TV show, but we put our number up on the screen because I made fun of the blue screen people. And then the Lord was like, well, if you think you can do better, then you should do it yourself. And so we started a prayer line. And I led the prayer line. And one night this guy called in. And he wanted to argue. He was a Christian, but he wanted to argue about doctrine. And back when I was 22, 23 years old, I was hot-headed. And I loved Jesus. And I loved the Word. I didn't necessarily love you. And if you came across Jesus and the Word and you talked about mom and apple pie, I was going to let you know it. And this guy started talking. And he started correcting me. And I didn't take to it too kindly. And I started correcting him. And he kept talking over me, which was another no-no when I was younger. And people in the room, we had 4 phones. And they were talking to people on the other line. And I was screaming at a guy about some stupid doctrine. I don't even remember. I can't tell you what it was about, but it's not worth repeating. But it was dumb. He was wrong, but it was dumb. And by the end of it, I took the phone and I said, slapped it down. And I said, I will never answer another phone ever again like that. And all the other people in the room went, shh, because they were talking to other people. I didn't win that argument, right or wrong. And you're not going to win an argument. All you can do is love. Love people where they are. Demonstrate Christ right where you are. Be the agent that He's called you to be. Be the ambassador. He called us to be agents of reconciliation. Reconciliation. Reconciling those back to Christ that are lost. Welcoming, it's a weird word, them home. Bringing them back in. That's our job. And I believe that that's exactly what the writer of Hebrews was trying to get the Hebrew people to see at that time. Listen, you have made the right decision. Christ is far superior than anything that's going on in this world. And once you have Christ, you have everything. Let's stand.